Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Roar Lions Roar. I am your fill-in host, Matt DeBear. We have kicked Bill and Nick out, and the Matts have taken over. I am joined tonight by my pal Matt Flipovitz over in Chicago. How are you doing this evening, Matt?
Matt, I'm excited that we get to talk about Hakeem Beeman mostly on this podcast, and we don't have to talk about anything else as far as I'm concerned. Just let me talk about Hakeem Beeman for 35 minutes, and we are set.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, our topic today is the Penn State defensive line. And for anyone who's listening who knows my partner here tonight, Hakeem Beeman is like the mythical son, the prodigal son returning home, if you will, for the Penn State defensive line. After his freshman year in 2020, my pal was expecting big things from him last year before he missed the year for
I've been banging this drum for like
reasons.
2.5 years. I've been banging this Hakeem Beeman drum for 2.5 years. I can't wait for it to finally pay off.
I can't wait till we find out that Matt has some sort of like familial connection to Hakeem. But his level of commitment to his pal and arguably a very important piece of the Penn State defensive line is admirable. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt and see whatever other thoughts he has on the Penn State defensive line heading into the 2022 season.
I love this group, man. I think John Scott Jr. has done an awesome job building phenomenal depth, both through recruiting and through the transfer portal. Like going out there and getting a guy like Chop Robinson, who I believe was a top 75 prospect, maybe even a little bit higher in the 2021 class, getting him to come up from Maryland and fill a position of need at defensive end is huge. I think coming off a year where you just really propelled Arnold Ebiketie into a whole new stratosphere as far as the NFL draft goes, to bring in probably a higher floor guy and a higher ceiling guy in Chop Robinson is fantastic. And then getting Adisa Isaac back from injury is huge. Nick Tarburton is just like a Ryan Buchholz kind of guy who's just doesn't make any flashy plays, but just is going to be in there and give you some solid reps. And then, to round out that edge rusher group, Smith Vilbert had a phenomenal Outback Bowl, and he's a guy who's been around a long time and was still learning football, and it's year 4 in the program for him. So I'm excited to see, what kind of step he can take. And then shifting inside, I think this is the deepest defensive tackle room Penn State's maybe ever had, in that PJ Mustafer is back, which I'm so excited about. Hakeem Beeman is back from whatever kept him out last year. You have Devon Ellies. You have Jordan Vandenberg, who I thought also played a really good game in the Outback Bowl. Kazaya Izzard, I don't know if he officially moved to defensive end, but he's like a hybrid guy who can play inside if need be. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody, but to have 5 dudes off the top of my head who can, really hold down the middle is truly phenomenal. So I'm excited to see what John Scott Jr. can do with this group and Manny Diaz.
I think we just recorded the offensive line podcast, and we talked a little bit about the depth there. I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record to those of you who listen to that one. But the depth of this group is just outstanding, and Matt alluded to it, and really inside and outside. Hakeem Beeman, Jordan Vandenberg, Devon Ellies, PJ Mustipher, Kazaya Izzard. All 5 of those guys have played varying levels of snaps, but all have been productive. And then you add in a freshman like Zane Durant, who
Zane Durant, that's what I was forgetting.
I wouldn't want to jump in and tell you because I really wanted to save that one for myself. But that's 6 guys right there that either have played significant snaps, been productive in the time they've had, or in Zane Durant's case, are getting glowing reviews since he's been on campus. When you throw around names, those names, and I think the benefit of Mustafer's injury last year and Beamon missing all season, it allowed guys like Ellies and Izzard to really get more experience than they probably otherwise would have. Then you come back in, you add back in Mustafer, who, depending on how he comes back from his injury, is able to, is a probably a second day type NFL pick. That's a huge positive. And I think, all those guys who are a year older, a year stronger, especially those young guys that continue to physically mature in the weight room, that's a really good starting point. And I know we haven't talked linebackers yet, but a group like that up front, especially in the inside, can make life a lot easier on a linebacking core that is probably the biggest question on the defense. And we'll get to that in later episodes, of course. But then you jump outside, and Matt mentioned Adisa Isaac is back from an Achilles injury. Chop Robinson coming in, Nick Tarburton in his 15th year out of Penridge. And then you've got, Vanover, who saw some time last year, Smith-Filbert, who had, like Matt said, a really productive Outback Bowl, certainly showcased his pass rushing ability. Then you add in a guy like Dennis-Sutton, the true freshman that, by all accounts, is getting better and better. He wasn't able to get on campus until later on at the start of the first summer session. He wasn't able to enroll early due to his high school rules. And then you've got another guy like Ken Talley, true freshman that's probably not going to play a whole lot. And they're going to miss Zariah Fisher, who's going to miss the season with an injury, the sophomore out of Alquippa.
It is cool to see him practicing, though. I will say it is cool to see Fisher doing some lighter work. I've seen in a couple of the videos that some people have posted. So it's good to see he's still around and still getting some mental reps at least. For sure. But I think it's a testament to the work that John Scott Jr. has done in building this group and recruiting through the transfer portal. There's probably, I don't know how many names we just mentioned. Feels like 10 or 12 guys that are going to factor in. And in a group that, as we've seen, really, and this goes back, decades to Larry Johnson, they want to rotate those guys through. Those guys, go hard every snap. And they've always tried to rotate guys in. I think you're not going to see as big of a drop-off when the 2s and even 3s in some cases get in there for sure,
in an effort to keep their top guys fresh. That's that type of rotation too, I think, in a long-term mindset, helps make the program more attractive to elite freshmen like Dennis-Sutton, where you've got an opportunity to play right away. Maybe you're not starting, maybe you're not even getting the most snaps. You're getting 20, 25 snaps a game, playing in big games like against Michigan, Ohio State, at Auburn. You see what that does at a place like Ohio State, where they bring in those elite guys year after year, and they're not starting every year, but they attract those guys. They know they're going to get to play, among other reasons. And I think that's really the story of this group is how many guys they really feel like they're able to play. And I think that is going to be a big reason that will help it, or a big explanation or answer to our next question is Penn State lost 2 key pieces off the defensive line last year in Arnold Ebiketie and Derek Tangelo, both guys drafted in the NFL. I haven't heard a whole lot about Ebiketie quite at this point through training camp, but Derek Tangelo was making the rounds on social media about a week or two ago, just absolutely dominating in some one-on-one drills with, I believe he's with the Atlanta Falcons.
Both him and AK.
Those
and he was UDFA. Tangelo was undrafted.
But those are 2 guys. Go ahead.
Yeah, we'll get this down without Bill. The inmates are in the asylum.
Those 2 guys were certainly instrumental. Those 2 guys were certainly so instrumental last year. And I think Ebiketie had the numbers, but I think Tangelo, in a lot of ways, especially after the Mustafer injury, was a more important player for Penn State up front. And those are 2 key pieces that need to be replaced.
Yeah, you can make the case Tangelo was the defensive line's MVP last year. For a guy to come up from Duke, and that's still big time football. No disrespect to the ACC, but maybe a little bit. But he started every game, and that was even before Mustafer got hurt. And then, as we found out about Beamon, and then eventually once Mustafer went down, he just became a guy who just gave them phenomenal reps, and I think allowed them to maintain red shirts on, like Jordan Vandenberg and a couple of the other younger guys, for them to ease in a little bit more. So in terms of replacing them, I think just with the pure volume of guys you have now at both those positions, I'll kind of focus in on, I'll do defensive tackle to start, but, Mustafer back already. Tangelo's, running partner for the start of the season is back. Hakeem Beeman, who probably would have started had he not had to miss the year, is back. So right there, you're probably going into the season with a higher floor. And then we saw Izzard and Ellis both, let's be honest, take their lumps. And for young players along the defensive line, that's something that kind of has to happen. It's a rite of passage. We've seen it happen. Thankfully, it's never got that bad to where they had to move an offensive guard over there to help them plug some holes. So that's a huge plus. But then you add in, Jordan Vandenberg and Zane Durant, who, are probably the 3 deep right now. I feel like both those guys could go in there and really make an impact tomorrow. So that's a great place that you have 6 dudes who on the interior who can really help make up for the loss of Tangelo, because one of them is going to be able to match it, and then from there, they're all going to raise the floor. And then in terms of Ebiketie, Penn State really hasn't had the sack numbers they had under Sean Spencer in the John Scott Jr. era, which is fine. Like, 2020 was weird. Shaka Toney and Odafe Owe got there, but every single quarterback knew it was coming and had to throw quick little passes. So it's kind of a wash. 2021, Ebiketie was the guy, and considering he was playing around a transfer in 1 year in the system and a young guy at defensive tackle, that really just says a lot to what he was able to do. So I think, bringing Adisa Isaac back from injury, getting him healthy is going to be huge. Tarburton's never going to be the guy to go back there and get those, huge sack numbers, but Dennis-Sutton could easily be that guy off the edge. It's going to take him maybe about a month to get up to speed, but to say by, the Penn State-Michigan game on October 15th that Dennis-Sutton couldn't be in the starting lineup, I don't think that's unrealistic. So you're just going to replace them, like we just talked about, with just this phenomenal depth. I'm not looking for one guy to be Ebiketie. I'm not looking for one guy to be Derek Tangelo. I'm looking for a group of guys to match that and then exceed that production.
No, I think I kind of set us up for kind of some concurring thoughts here with our talking points, but that's exactly it. Is you've got this volume of options. I think if push came to shove and who's going to be the guy to replace that? I think Beamon's return in the middle is really going to be a kind of a linchpin. I think it was easy to forget how productive he was in his redshirt freshman year. I think it was his redshirt freshman year back in 2020 in the limited season. But he showed those flashes. I'm curious because he's still listed at 261. I'm curious to see how that translates because he kind of became. He's got to be
bigger than that. He's got to be bigger than that. That's way smaller than Gibbons was even when he played.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see one, how accurate that is, but two, how he gets used and how he gets kind of brought along. How a guy like Zane Durant, who, it's easy to look past a true freshman, but too many guys that follow the program closely talk too much about him to think that there is some Kevin Gibbons in him. That's the name that's been thrown around as kind of his skill set, if you will. He's not a tall guy. He's only 6'1", but super quick feet, super strong, and that lower center of gravity kind of gives him advantage too in the inside. But and then outside, I think I'm really curious to see what Adisa Isaac does. That was kind of a blow to the whole defense last year, and it was kind of a in hindsight a sign of things to come. Losing him before the season started to an Achilles injury. I'm really curious to see how where he's at because I think he was a guy that they were talking about as potential first round type level of talent, depending on how it all came together before the injury. And I'm certainly far from a doctor, but reading a little bit about the expectations for a guy coming back from that type of injury, where's he at? He was so quick off the edge before the injury. Is he at that level? Is he a step slow? But at the same time, he's also had 2 years to both rehab the injury, but also get bigger and stronger. And I think when we last saw him, he was a true speed rusher. He didn't have necessarily the upper body strength to rely on another way to get to the quarterback. So I'm curious to see, especially if he's lost that step, at least early on, where he's at with those other tools that you have in your tool belt as a defensive end. I'm really curious to see Chop Robinson. He was a guy who was, like you said, very heralded out of high school, out of Gaithersburg, Maryland. Didn't have a ton of numbers with Maryland, but certainly flashed as a freshman with them. I'm curious to see kind of how they utilize him. When he was being recruited, they talked a lot about utilizing him as kind of a Micah Parsons type player. Given kind of what they see now with both what they saw in the field last year at Maryland, and now they've had him on campus for a couple months, it sounds like they view him more as a true defensive end. But the fact they were talking about him in that kind of scenario as a high schooler tells you the kind of athleticism and talent you're working out there. And I'm really interested to see some of these guys that we're not going to probably see a lot of, but Devon Townley, the redshirt freshman out of Minnesota. Who's the other name that I was thinking of? Rodney McGraw out of Chicago, or from Chicago, but out of Elkhart, Indiana. The next step that those guys take, I don't think either of them are necessarily going to factor in. If they do, either something's gone terribly right for them or terribly wrong on the defensive line.
Yeah.
But watch those guys take the next step. And then I had one other thought that just popped out of my mind. But it, not to belabor the point, there's a lot of depth to work with there. I know what I was going to say. Nick, if you can cut this and make it sound a lot better than I just made it sound, I'd really appreciate it. But watch Smith Vilbert take the next step. Like we talked about, he was a pass rushing madman in the Outback Bowl, but he kind of got exposed in the run game. So
yeah,
again, you saw his raw athleticism. Watch him take the next step. You'll become more of a well-rounded player. Speaking of well-rounded, well-rounded home field apparel.
Real quick on the Adisa Isaac point before I forget. Can you name the defensive lineman to play as true freshman under James Franklin? I think is it YGM and Adisa? Yeah, I can't think of any others outside of YGM, a second-round pick, and Adisa Isaac. I can't think of anybody else. Can you? Yeah.
Jason Oweh didn't.
No, Shane Simmons didn't.
Oweh now didn't.
Shaka didn't. I can't. So that says a lot about what the staff thinks of Adisa Isaac. That it's him and a second-round pick as the two, true freshmen to get meaningful snaps as right off the bat.
For sure, and the guys that he was competing with when he came in, it wasn't like he was played out of necessity. He played because he was capable, and that production as a freshman led to the buzz about him going into last year before he suffered that injury. You ruined my great segue, but
sorry.
We are of course sponsored now by the great folks at Home Field Apparel, who on Saturday, August 13th, on their Big Noon Saturday drop, launched a 15-piece Penn State line that you can get 15% off of with code ROARLIONSROAR at checkout on your first purchase. So if you have purchased from them before, thank you for supporting them. But also, we cannot give you any money off because you've already proven to understand the value you are getting from these great shirts. I do not have mine yet. I don't even know if they're in the mail. I have not gotten my shipping notification. I did not order right away. I was out doing some errands on Saturday, but we placed a significant order on Saturday evening. So I do not have any yet. Matt, I know you have some from their previous launches, so you can tell our listeners some of the great things they're looking forward to.
Yeah, home field stuff I think just fits my body very well, especially their crew necks. I'm a huge crew neck guy, and I'm very excited to get a new one because all the Penn State ones I got at the Goodwill in Copley, Pennsylvania, and they're all double XL. So to have a large one that fits me like a person and not like a parachute, I'm very excited about. So they do such great work. The designs they released for this Penn State collection are all really fun and really unique. There's the Nittany Lion playing sports, which is like impossible to find a lot of places. Him, in a wrestling singlet, which looked really cool, and him playing hockey, which was always really fun. But their shirts are just of such high quality. They're great people to work with. And, we're in first place right now for the Big News Saturday leaderboard. We overtook the Florida Gators, which I was very pleased to see. But next up is Ohio State. So I hope we built a big enough lead, but it never hurts to go in here and maybe help us close it out a little bit. I know these won't count towards the standings, but I think we'll all know in the event that Ohio State passes us, which I don't think they will, but it always helps to get a little bit of extra in here at the end. So highly recommend their stuff. Again, that's code ROARLIONSROAR, all capital, one word at checkout for 15% off your first order.
I think the one thing I've always thought is really cool about all their stuff that's been released for all the different schools that they're working with now is it's so unique. They go back through your schools and Penn State's case, Penn State's history of old logos, old mottos, and pull that stuff out. I'm feel a little. I'll be 40 in January, so I'm probably exactly as old as I feel. But one of the hooded sweatshirts that they released has the oval Nittany Lion logo that we still see everywhere, but it's got what I think a lot of people my age or maybe a little bit older refer to as the tennis ball script or tennis ball font, Penn State wording. That's on there, and I love that it's back on Penn State merchandise, I hate that it's considered retro, because that means that, and it has been now, this is 21 years since I was a freshman in school at Penn State. So I certainly am older than I probably realize I am. But the fact that that is retro is both cool because it means that it's coming back now, but also a little disturbing because that was the Penn State end zone. I think all 4 years I was there. It might have changed my senior year.
I'm so mad we didn't have those end zones when I was in school. Those end zones are awesome. I'm so mad we don't have those.
I don't know if home field can help us out with this, but if they can bring back the Argyle end zones, then we will be forever grateful. I will give them my credit card and just order at will for whatever they want. But like we said, code ROARLIONSROAR at checkout, 15% off on your first purchase. Going back to the defensive line here, we've talked a lot about getting guys back, but I think I want to dive into the true benefit of getting those guys back. Adisa Isaac, Hakeem Beeman, PJ Mustafer are the three big guys that I think have played meaningful snaps that, in two of their cases missed all of last year. In Mustafer's case, missed just a hair over half the year. I'm going out in the Iowa game. Matt, what is the, I think we talked a little bit about the on-field benefit, but this kind of the intangibles that getting guys like that back can do for not only the defensive line, but I think the defense and the team as a whole.
Yeah, it's all dudes in their at least third year in the program, and that's where your leadership comes from. And for a group that is going to be playing in front of a linebacker core that, let's call it, is going to be questionable, I think that's huge for keeping everybody focused, engaged, and playing their best football. I think Mustafer's a lock for a captain, and rightfully so, man. He has been such a great ambassador for the program. He killed it at 2 media days, which going to 1 media day sounds like a horrible experience. So the fact that he got to go twice and really be a great ambassador for the school, it says a lot about who he is and what he brings to that room every day. And I think John Scott Jr. is really going to appreciate having a guy like PJ, who can just eat space and play his role really well. And for Adisa, it's raising the floor of that edge rusher group. I think a lot of us, especially after he got hurt, went into 2021 with pretty low expectations because we were thinking it was going to be Nick Tarburton, a guy who just hadn't been able to stay healthy prior to that season, and Arnold Ebiketie, a speed rush transfer from the group of 5 level. So right off the bat, Isaac just raises your floor just a ton. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do in year 3, after a year, to take a step back and see where he fits in the broader, scheme of things. I remember I asked John Reed about this at a media day years ago about what did the year away from the field do for you? And John Reed just said, it opened my eyes to everything that was going on outside of my bubble. So I'm really curious to see if Adisa Isaac takes that same kind of step. And then I'm going to pound my fist on my table here. Hakeem Beeman is the best defensive lineman on Penn State's roster. He probably would have been last year too. This dude was so good as a redshirt freshman, but nobody remembers because nobody cares about the third redshirt freshman defensive tackle on a 4-5 team in a pandemic. People have no idea how dominant Hakeem Beeman can be when he's at his best. I think he is a guy who has first-round potential. I think he's a dude who is just so unique in the sense that he's smaller than Kevin Gibbons, but he's bigger than like a Yetur Gross-Matos kind of guy, and he's just going to play like a blender kind of role where he's just going to try to confuse tackles, guards, centers, and in a Manny Diaz, that defense that thrives off chaos, to have that kind of weapon is just invaluable. So, you get Mustafer for the leadership, you get Isaac back just for the expected production, and then you get Beamon back for what it allows you to do up front. All 3 of those guys just bring such a unique addition to a Penn State defensive line room that already would have been pretty good, had Isaac, opted to, continue to get healthy or slow down his recovery. Hakeem Beeman had to have, missed another year, or Mustafer went pro. I think this group coming back just means that the sky is the limit for this team.
I think the big thing with Mustafer, and you heard a lot about it, almost immediately after he got hurt last year. I think they all kind of knew after that Iowa game. Obviously they lost Clifford in that game too, lost the lead late. You certainly don't need to rehash that. But the way James Franklin, and I'd argue more importantly, his teammates talked about PJ Mustafer, and what losing a guy like that, and like I said, they kind of knew at that point it was for the year. They hadn't officially confirmed it, but I think everyone kind of had a pretty good sense within the team what the situation was. That's a heart and soul guy. You know, his talent we all know about. We see that every Saturday on the field. But I think to you really get to know what a guy's like when you hear what his teammates say about him. And everyone that was asked about PJ Mustafer last year, you could just sense how they felt about him. And just having that presence around, if he didn't play another down of football, having his presence around the team this year, I think is going to be invaluable. I think it was invaluable last year for guys like Devon Townley and Kazaya Izzard, who were playing their first true meaningful snaps of college football. To have a guy like that there that had really seen it all, and very easily, could have kind of checked out and didn't want to be around. He was a surefire NFL draft pick before the injury. Yep. Didn't really know what his future was going to look like at that point. There was none of that. He was there on, I think he had one of the little scooters, to keep weight off his leg, and he just was sitting there with his leather jacket on, had the biggest smile in the world. I think that presence, whether it's PJ Mustafer or anyone, but having that kind of presence around a football team is just so valuable. And I think, not to get too big picture here because we're focused on the defensive line, that's, I think, been something that has maybe been lacking a little bit the last couple of years. They haven't had that kind of big personality, big presence, team captain, leader type of guy. They've had leaders, no doubt. But it takes all kinds. And I think, though, like you go back to the 16 and 17 teams, you had Trace McSorley, who was vocal. We saw, the kind of leader he was on a weekly basis. Jason Kabinda. Yeah. Even guys like Mike Gesicki grew into roles like that. Not that the guys that have been there since then are bad guys by any means. That's certainly not the case, but they're just different kinds of guys. And they've kind of been missing that PJ Mustafer kind of element as a person. So I think that's invaluable. And I think what's cool with guys like Beamon and Isaac coming back from injuries, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, is that their absence allowed other guys to take on bigger roles. And Mustafer's injury obviously led to bigger roles for those guys and others as well. But then you're adding back in, and you mentioned this too, Matt, you're adding back in that experience. And in Beeman's case, he practiced last year. It wasn't like he was, missing in action. He was at practice working with the scout team. I would imagine was certainly around the weight room. So he's had 2 years worth of physical growth and practice time and everything else that goes along with it. Whereas a guy like Isaac, has had 2 years of growth, but part of that was spent in rehab. So, or rehabbing the injury that didn't come out very well at all. Hopefully everyone knows what I meant. But I think you're adding back in leadership, experience, and talent to a group that gained experience for sure, and grew into those bigger roles. And now I think long term everyone's better for it because you're adding back in, kind of the cherry on top. Any additional thoughts? I know you kind of mentioned, and I want to give you some time to talk a little bit about it, is the impact that Manny Diaz is going to have on this group. 'Cause I think it speaks to both the defensive line and kind of the mindset I think they want from that group, but also I think how it translates to some of the other stuff we've talked about on other podcasts and some of the big picture season preview sorts of things.
Manny Diaz and this defensive line, as weird as it sounds, are about to be Sean Clifford's best friend. Brent Pry's philosophy of bend, don't break was fine. It was great for keeping points off the board. It was awful for having Sean Clifford and company not start drives inside of their own 20, because blocking field goals are great, but then Sean Clifford and the offense have the ball at like the 28-yard line and have to go 60 yards to get anywhere to be able to score, and they couldn't run the ball. So they lost that whole element. What Manny Diaz wants to do is he wants to live in the backfield. And when you're able to live in the backfield and force teams into second and long, third and long, that opens the door for explosive plays on the defensive side of the football. That's strip sacks, that's fumbles, that's interceptions. And with a group up front that consists of, Beamon, Mustafer, Isaac, Tarburton, Robinson, all these dudes who have an ability to, get behind the line of scrimmage and make a play. That's going to be such a big thing for getting teams behind the sticks, off schedule. And then Penn State's defense and their great defenders in the secondary can get their hands on the football and maybe get the ball to the offense on their own 40 instead of on their own 25. And that's a huge difference. So if this defensive line plays the way Manny Diaz wants them to play, it's going to open up so many opportunities to get your hand on the football. And that's only going to set up Sean Clifford and the offense with better field position and hopefully take some pressure off of them. So that all starts up front. And I think they have the guys to go out there and really set the tone early on in a lot of games.
You mentioned earlier, Matt, that Penn State hasn't really had the sack numbers that, given the amount of talent that's come through the program in the last half dozen years or so, that you would expect. And I think part of that is because of that defensive philosophy that you alluded to. We're going to keep the play in front of us, not give up the big play. We're going to make you go 12. If you're going to score, you're going to go 12 plays, 80 yards to do it. And that generally leads to, 3rd and 3, 2nd and 6, not your obvious passing downs where you can turn a guy loose on the end, knowing that he doesn't have to worry about the run. And what I think is really exciting is we just spent half an hour talking about all the depth and all this great talent up front, including a number of guys who were kind of born to get after the quarterback. But I think you're going to see a defense that ideally puts them in a position to do that. And then we're going to talk about it in some episodes that you'll see later or hear later this week. Penn State's secondary is just full of guys that want to take the football away. Jair Brown. There's been a lot of talk about Wheatley, who is in a battle at one of the safety spots. There's one of the other guys' name has come up a lot this year as far as taking the ball away in practice. So they have some dudes in the secondary to steal a favorite line of Bill's that want to get after the football. And they have a bunch of guys up front who want to get after the quarterback. And I think, to put it very simply, and you said this too, Matt, the goal of Manny Diaz's defense is to get in the second long, get in the third long, where we know what you're going to do. We know you're going to throw the ball. And I don't think that was consistently the case with Brent Pry, who certainly coordinated some unbelievable defenses. They were rated among the top 10, 15% in the country pretty consistently year after year. But with that came, he had a different philosophy of how he was going to keep you out of the end zone, and it worked. And it worked really well. They went to 3 New Year's Day bowl games. They won the Big Ten. Certainly wasn't any slouch. But I think when you see the talent that Penn State's recruited on defense, especially on the defensive line, I think his general mindset fits more with what Penn State has on the roster. And I think, to a bigger picture idea, more what college football has become. You got to create the big play, whether it's on offense or defense, and your big play on defense is taking the ball away. And Penn State has certainly been better about that. Certainly last year, they were among one of the top teams in the country, I believe, in interceptions. But they came at not necessarily the right time. They came. They weren't forcing the interception necessarily. They were taking advantage of a bad throw or a bad read by the quarterback, for example. I'm excited to see that mindset translate to all these guys we just mentioned. I think it's going to be very exciting. I think you're going to see Penn State get more points than they probably have. They're not going to be a top 10 scoring defense. But if you're creating shorter fields and giving your offense an easier chance to put their own points on the board, which, as we have talked about in the first series of our season preview podcast with the offense, they've got a lot of skill position guys who can do that if it comes together. So it's a big unknown. It's one of those big questions that we have to see how it gets answered going into the season, but it's an exciting one to keep an eye on starting here in, as we talk, I believe it's 18 days from the season opener in West Lafayette. Any additional thoughts on the defensive line for you, Matt, before we call it a night?
That's all I got. Hakeem Beeman, hype train. It got delayed by a year, but I am very happy that he is going to deliver in a major way. I'm very excited to see him play.
You can follow Matt on Twitter and Instagram for the Hakeem Beeman for Heisman campaign. I believe he is launching that campaign as we speak. But for my co-host, Matt Filipovich, who I have now gotten right 4 of the 5 times I have said his full name this evening, I'm your host, Matt DeBear. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to check out our friends at Homefield, Roar Lines Roar at checkout for 15% off your first purchase. Thanks for listening to Roar Lines Roar, and we'll catch you in the next episode.